Well, my childhood was heavily influenced because my role model, which is my mother, really had heavy influence on the career that I chose. I saw her as a great advocate and a humanitarian, and she was always very passionate about working with communities and protecting the environment. She's an environmental activist. So that being around her and seeing her passion and desire to really bring the voice of the communities to the fold and really being a great advocate. I didn't realize what advocacy really was when I was young, but I think she's probably one of the best advocacy people I've ever met. And so yeah, she heavily influenced my desire to work with communities and come to Africa and do the work that I'm doing. So I got into humanitarian space really by accident because Adeso, when I started working with them, there was a drought in the communities that we were working with, and where there was a long-term education program that we were running and some environmental activities. So we were a development organization, had no capacity or interest in working in the humanitarian space. I think even our ethos and our values were not in line with the humanitarian work of, get goods or service here, deliver quick, and then leave the communities. Our work was really just working hand in hand with the communities at a very, grassroots level. And so that doesn't quite mesh, or it oftentimes clashes with the approach of humanitarian actors. But I think it's having that benefit of coming from that background and those values of really accompanying the communities, serving them, and not seeing ourselves as the saviors of the community, had a huge impact on the way I view humanitarian work, and why I'm very passionate about changing and transforming the system, because I think it is extremely flawed, because there's a power that's embedded and in the way that or most organizations approach humanitarian work, where we are here to save you, and we have the resources and we have the power. I don't see why this is really a controversial issue in the humanitarian space, but I think it demonstrates how far behind the humanitarian system is from the development system. There have been, conversations and discussions and discourse and writings about the neo-colonial nature of the development system, how aid has really disempowered people and marginalized the communities. And all of that is there's plethora of evidence about that in the development space. But in the humanitarian system, you can't mention words around racism or colonialism or neo-colonial system without getting really into trouble. And it just baffles me. But yeah, the system is quite structured from the top down in a very racist manner. And the fact that at the most senior level where decisions are made at the IAC, there is no representation of Global South communities, Global South countries that are affected. There's no representation of civil society from the Global South, to the national level, where we have to fight for space at decision-making forums such as the humanitarian country streams. It was only recent through the localization agenda and post-WHS that we are seeing local NGOs and civil society from those countries represented in these forums. I think, outside of really facing the reality of the power dynamics and really trying to give more power and voice to communities who are affected, and really removing these barriers, we need to figure out how to really create some equity in the system. So at all levels. So there's the issue around financing of local actors, and removing barriers and creating infrastructure so that more money can be given directly to local NGOs. There's issues around really how do we give voice to affected communities we call beneficiaries, which is a term that I'm not really very happy with. but how do we give voice to local communities in the humanitarian system? How do we actually have communities that are affected be recognized as important as the donor who gives the money? Why is it that international agencies and the system itself responds only to donors rather than the communities who are the real clients? If it was the private sector, I always say the majority of international organizations and some local NGOs would be fired and would lose their business or have to, declare bankruptcy. I shape my future by really trying to transform the humanitarian aid system that is really unequal and marginalizes the voice of local communities and local actors. If we are really serious about meeting the SDGs, whether it's on poverty alleviation or whether it's on climate change and the environment or education, local communities and civil society in the global south, in those communities where we're trying to improve the SDG indicators, are a primal key part of that process, and they cannot be ignored. And that is what the current aid system does. It really marginalizes them and really puts them outside of the system. So how do we really shift power and shift resources and provide agency to those communities that are really truly impacted by the SDGs? And that is how I'm shaping my future, by really being a part of democratizing civil society and the aid system.